Hello. I find myself returning to Archway in North London for today's video. I made a video a few weeks back talking about the tube station here, and now we're back to talk about, among other things, trams. Before I go into that though, this seems like a good point to address some questions people raised in the comments section on previous videos. A few people wanted to know why Archway was called that. Well, the answer is because of the Archway. This is a very hilly part of London, and the original Archway was a bridge designed by the architect John Nash, which carried Hornsey Lane over the Great North Road, what's now the A1. This bridge was demolished and replaced in 1900 by the current bridge. By a happy coincidence, I happened to find these two antique postcards depicting the archways a couple of days ago. The bridge gave its name to the area, although it was more of a local nickname until the tube station took the name Highgate Archway in 1913. By the way, in my video on tube stations named after pubs, a few people asked if the tube station here was named after the Archway Tavern. It was not, although the current Archway Tavern does predate the station by just under 20 years, and there have been Archway taverns on the site since at least the early 18th century. That's not to say that the Archway Tavern has no significance in the history of things that run on rails in London. It used to be an important tram stop. Initially, this was simply because it was a major road junction. In a discreet little alleyway on Holloway Road, we can see the most visible remnant of the tramway system, this little bit of track here. This was formerly the entrance to the North Metropolitan Tramway Company's depot. The North Met began operating in 1870 and was, at that time, one of the smaller companies in London, only running trams along Holloway Road and along Upper Street in Islington. It had a grand total of 2.5 miles of track. That would soon grow to nearly 35 miles of track by the mid-1880s across North and East London. The company experimented with steam trams in 1877 and with electricity in 1887. But this depot was for horse trams. In 1884, a rather unusual kind of tram service began operating between Archway and Highgate Village. This was a cable car. Highgate Hill is a fearsomely steep gradient for steel wheels on steel rails, so in order to climb it, the Highgate Hill Tramways Company borrowed an idea from San Francisco. The way this operated was that there was a conduit between the rails with a moving cable driven by a winding engine. The trams were fitted with grippers that could engage or disengage with the cable as required, enabling them to climb the unforgiving hill. The track was built to a narrow gauge of 3 foot 6 inches compared to the standard 4 foot 8.5. Unfortunately, the line was not a huge success financially speaking. In 1892 there was a fatal accident after a cable snapped, causing a tram to run down the hill and crash. This led to the line's closure. It was reopened in 1896 under new ownership, Highgate Hill Tramways Limited, but the new bosses couldn't make it pay any better than the old ones could. In 1905, a new tram line reached Archway from the north. This one was owned by Middlesex County Council and operated by Metropolitan Electric Tramways. Now, electric trams were a real game-changer. They didn't get tired like a horse. They were more flexible than a cable tram, and they were clean and quiet compared to steam. What was more, they were modern. Trams were no longer just the thing you took because you couldn't afford anything better. They were working-class heroes. And they shook things up, not just for the tram companies, but for the buses and the railways. People realised how tired they were of getting smoke in their eyes and manure on their boots. Also in 1905, the North Metropolitan Tramways were bought out by the London County Council. And here we're going to have to get into a bit of politics. In 1898, a gentleman named John Benn was appointed head of the Highways Committee of London County Council. The LCC was, as its name suggests, the governing body for London. Benn was a progressive who believed that, in view of the tram's importance as a means of transport for the less well-off Londoners, they should be under municipal control. In the Tramways Act of 1870, municipal authorities had the right to take over tramways that had been operating for 21 years. And indeed, since the early 1890s, they had been taking over odd lines here and there. But they didn't actually have the right to operate trams themselves until the London County Council Act of 1896. They had to farm the lines they own out to the tramway companies to actually run the trams. The Act changed all that, and so from 1899 onwards they really kicked into high gear, taking over lines, building new ones, and upgrading those in their possession to electric power. The aim was to create an extensive and affordable transport network for the people. In 1909 they bought the cable tram out and had it rebuilt to standard gauge and electrified. But I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. There are a couple more game changers we need to talk about. The first came in 1906, nowhere near Archway. It was the Kingsway tram tunnel in Holborn. This was a vital artery in the tram network, because what it provided was a trunk route between the tram network of North London and that of South London. It became possible to get a tram all the way from Archway to Elephant and Castle. In 1907, Archway Station opened. Back then it was known as Highgate. Why this is important in the story of the trams is that it was owned by Underground Electric Railways of London. The company had been formed under American leadership, who well understood the principles of urban transportation. They didn't want to fight the trams, they wanted to cooperate with them. Then maybe take them over later, but that's another story. They understood that trams and buses could feed into the tube to provide a better service for all. Archway's importance as a tram stop drastically improved. In 1914, a conduit change pit was constructed at Archway by the LCC. This probably sounds like quite a basic thing to mention, but let me explain. Most electric trams, like those of the Metropolitan Electric Tramways, picked power up from overhead wires. Those operated by the LCC picked power up from a conduit between the rails, because the wealthy and influential folk of central London didn't want a tangle of wires outside their windows. What the conduit changeover pit meant was that Metropolitan Electric trams could switch from overhead to conduit pickup, and therefore they could run through to central London. In the early 20th century, the tram must have seemed like king of the road. If it was, its reign was short-lived. By the late 1920s, the motor bus had begun to overtake it in popularity. A lack of maintenance made the trams rough riding and unreliable. They went from affordable and modern to cheap and nasty. In 1933, the tram network was taken over by London Transport, who had little interest in these rattly contraptions, and began a programme of replacement with trolleybuses and motor buses. The process was gradual, held up by financial constraints and the Second World War. Archway saw some of the last trams in London, with the service up Highgate Hill lasting into 1952, the final year of operation. Archway is still an important transport hub, but these days it's buses rather than trams that carry people onward from the tube station. Perhaps the sparking electric trams were a flash in the pan, or perhaps they were the star that burns the brightest but burnt the quickest. I'll let you be the judge. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the conduit changeover pit to my through service. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.